Hello everybody, my name is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal Brews video series here on my channel. Today I got a pretty sweet 3-faction brew for you. As you can see here, I called it Rakano Scar midrange. The deck basically came from the idea that Jekk kind of has potential. The problem is he's kind of aggressive, but 6 power is too much for a traditional aggressive deck because they usually want to stop at 4 or 5 with their curve. So I basically came up with the idea to build some kind of like mid-range aggressive deck, like a mid-range deck that is very much slanted towards aggression, and Rakano Scar is the tri-faction combination that lends itself very well to that, because we have a bunch of like cheap early interaction. We have one of the best aggressive 2-drops in the game in Argenport, Instigator in Shadow, and we also get Champion of Glory, even though it's a bit of a stretch on the on the influence base in Rakano. So this gives us 2 really powerful, high quality, but also still aggressive 2-drops. Then we have the best aggressive 3-drop in the game, as in the best 3-drop in the game in general, and then we have some great complementary, also kind of more leaning towards aggression slanted 3-drops in Justice. I'll talk about all the cards in detail a bit later, and then we have some value units that also help aggression at the same point, and Obliterate has the nice double purpose of being a removal and a finisher, so we get to play like a lot of good cards that also help a more proactive game plan. So yeah, I basically brewed this deck with some help from Unearthly, so shout out to Unearthly. Thanks for helping me figure out some of the card choices and streamlining the deck. I had like a very rough brew and idea what I wanted to do, and Unearthly was willing to talk through things with me and clean up the list, question some of the options that I was considering, and push the whole thing into like a good direction. So that is always really helpful to have someone else smart to like bounce ideas off of and discuss stuff to figure out where you are wrong or when you're stuck, where to go next basically. So that was a lot of fun and a lot of help, and we also played the deck quite a bunch after, and it did actually pretty well too. So we rocked somewhere between like 55 to 60%. I didn't quite track, but we at some point had like all wins in my profile history, with even like a win after and before and stuff. So I think we at some point were something like, I don't know, 12-5 or something like that, with later getting a couple of losses. So the deck is, while probably not the new best deck in the game, is a viable deck that can hold its own on the ladder. So if you're looking for something that is kind of different and like to just play all these great cards together, then this might be for you. If you're just trying to maximize your win percentage and just wanna climb as much and as fast and consistent as possible, then this is probably not for you. It's definitely more of a diversion and brew than a legit new top deck, for sure. Like for example the Voltron deck that I recorded a while ago, which also started as a brew, actually is like a legit viable deck. This one is more like a fine deck that you can play without throwing your rank out of the window and even climbing while playing it. But there's definitely stronger options if you're just looking to win. Alright, let's talk about the cards. So once again, we have Sabotage, just like in my Stonescar midrange, basically for the same purposes as there. The deck starts kind of on the back foot with no 1-drop and having kind of a like slow and potentially clunky and a bit wonky power base with all the heavy requirements and potentially depleted power sources. So you need ways to make sure that you don't get tempoed further against aggressive decks. So Sabotage hitting their tempo plays in rapid shot and cheap removal and stuff is pretty vital there, so they can't stabilize our early defense, so we can set up blocks. And against slower decks, we need to be able to take their swingy cards and value plays like Stash, Auric Runehammer, Harsh Rule, all these cards that trade for multiple cards of ours and help them stabilize, so we can end the game, because we are certainly not able to beat them on a value angle. Next we have Foreseek Power. That's part of the power base and super crucial to make the power work reasonably well. And I can tell you, with quite some discussion and theory crafting with Unearthly, we got the power to like a pretty good distribution, and the power is actually quite good for how greedy the requirements are in this deck. I'll talk about that later when I talk about the power base. Next we have some cheap removal. 3 Suffocate, 4 Torch, and 3 Vanquish. So as usual, a deck like this needs cheap removal to catch up on the lost tempo early on, and also to get tempo to pull ahead in matchups where we are the aggression against like blockers in slower decks. So these are like the best options. Suffocate and Vanquish only 3, because they are kind of situational, and Torch 4 simply because it's a super versatile, efficient card and like one of the best cards in the game right now. Next we have the 2-drops, Instigator and Champion of Glory, 2 of the most powerful proactive 2-drops, alongside Awakened Student, which this deck cannot support. Yeah, that's part of why I chose, as I said, this faction combination, because we want at least like 2 2-drops to have like kind of a redundancy after we skip our 1-drop, that we at least as often as possible present a proactive 1-drop, a proactive 2-drop to start setting up defenses against aggro and setting up offense against slower decks. Next we have the 3-drops. For Champion of Chaos is self-explanatory. It's the whole reason to be partially Stonescar. The requirements are pretty heavy, but the deck is set up in a way that he is as often as possible a 4/4 overwhelm by turn 3, and after that the deadly kind of like happens incidentally over the course of the game, so it will eventually in the mid to late game be a 5/5 deadly, but you can usually only count on him being a 4/4 in the early to mid game, which is still good for 3 power, especially since we also get overwhelm on top of it. And yeah, sometimes he's just a 5/5 on turn 3 still in this deck, because of the Stonescar dual lands that we still run almost all of them. Next we have 3 Bailiff and 3 Enforcer. We started with 4 Enforcer and like Beastcaller's Amulet. Amulet was actually pretty good. The problem is that it only was really good in the matchups we were already doing fairly well in, while we were definitely struggling with matchups like Jido and heavy 1-drop heavy draws from Burn Queen and stuff, especially with a lot of drones. And yeah, Bailiff helps a lot there. The Warcry is still in line with our more aggressive stance, so that's nice. And we have removal to clear the path for his small body to still Warcry freely. And also the -1 actually happens to have great synergy with Suffocate. It came up quite a bunch to do stuff like they play a 4/4 Champion of Chaos, we turn 4 Copperhall Bailiff, Suffocate the champion, stuff like that. That's really great synergy. I would still kind of want to fit in the Force Enforcer if I could, but I don't really see how, because we can't really cut back on removal, we can't really cut back on our other curve slots since we already have the most 3-drops, so there's simply basically no way to fit another one. I would even also not mind a Force Bailiff due to the synergy with Suffocate, but with 3 Suffocates, 3 Bailiff is probably fine, and Bailiff can be pretty low impact in some matchups, so 3 is probably the right number. And yeah, the only and there's not really a way to fit a Force Enforcer, which would be still a nice card because the card is just great, especially in a more proactive deck. But yeah, we also can't cut on power because the deck really needs the amount of power and influence that it currently has to function reasonably well. Next we have the best 4-drop for this type of deck and faction combination, Statuary Maiden. Kind of like the Stonescar Sandstorm Titan, if you will, because given that we have quite a bunch of removal and also force traits in combat, getting cudgels, getting 1 or 2 cudgels should usually be possible from a maiden if she's not silenced or killed, and then she's basically like 4/6 or even 6/8 in stats for like 4 to 6 power, which is pretty great given what else she does in terms of suppressing Entomb and Recursion and trading reliably thanks to Deadly and so on and so forth. So yeah, Maiden is just great. Also, the cudgels have great synergy with the Quick Draw and Champion of Glory and Jekk. Next we have settled on Obliterate as our 5-drop. Like, I initially had Reapers as an idea. The point is just that Reaper is a bit more of a strain on the power base once again, because we don't want to be relying on hitting 2 Shadow too much. Plus, yeah, it's kind of fragile, and the deck kind of could use some more removal. So Obliterate seemed nice. I mean, it's still possible that Reaper is better or is also good, but the idea behind Obliterate is basically we curve like 2, 3, 4, and then our 5 and 6 plays are both like swingy plays that impact the board. Obliterate kills something and deals some damage, lets us attack once again if they had a blocker that stopped us from attacking. Then the turn after they play another blocker that might stop us from attacking. Then we play Jekk and silence stun the blocker and attack once again, and by that point we have a 6 power quick draw unit in play, and the opponent so far behind that even if they still have something to throw in our way, it probably won't be enough. So yeah, Obliterate is just like a more flexible forward play that lets us break open a stalled board, while Reaper does not, like especially if the stall is caused by like a Sandstorm Titan. The Reaper is just gonna sit there and look dumb basically. And we only have like limited amounts of removal for Titan, and Obliterate adds more removal for Titan, which is nice. Kind of like has a bit of a similar purpose as, say, the Stonescar Mauls in like the Stonescar mid-range deck, for example, except that the Maul is one more expensive and wouldn't really do a lot here because we neither have room nor desire to support like a weapon stash package, and without stash, Maul is way worse than Obliterate. So yeah, and last but not least, the card that made me want to build the deck is Jekk, the Bounty Hunter. I basically, even though I have saved the deck as Rakano Scar midrange, just as like a description, I would call the deck Jekk's Bounty Hunters, because it's basically a bunch of really strong, aggressive units, kind of like hunting down your opponent, led by Jekk. So yeah, the deck should be called Jekk's Bounty Hunters to do justice to Jekk as a card, and in being responsible for that deck coming into existence, because I actually talked about Jekk with Unearthly like a day before I brewed this deck, about how he theoretically, like even a nice card, he just is basically 1 power too expensive to go in the decks that would want him, like in Rakano. So if he was like a 5/3 quick draw for 5, he would be like really great in Rakano. I could see playing him overplayed even, because then he would still like do a lot of what Plate does, as in like opening up the board while not rotting in your hand if you don't have a unit, and the 3 health would make him fairly balanced in that he is vulnerable to Torch, and the Warcry would make it so that oftentimes you can evade the Torch issue, and the Quick Draw has great synergy with Torch and stuff. So it's just kind of a bit unfortunate that they made a card that is clearly slanted towards aggression and aggressive decks, this expensive, basically past the threshold of what aggressive decks usually can stomach in terms of curve. So yeah, that's basically the problem with Jekk as a card, in my opinion. The card is not mid-rangey enough tendentially in what it does to justify putting in a deck that actually wants 6-drops, as in a typical mid-range deck. Like Tyrant, for example, Infernal Tyrant is mid-rangey enough in what it does that you actually want to put it into a mid-range deck. Jekk is very much a card that does stuff that you would want to put in an aggressive deck, but it's just 1 power too expensive, and it would have been really nice to see him a bit smaller in stats and 1 power cheaper, so he actually fits into decks like that, or give him a more mid-range feel at 6 in what he does, so he would maybe better enable some kind of like Rakano mid-range deck that doesn't really exist right now. Alright, so yeah, that's it for the cards. Jekk still feels really nice and really powerful actually in this deck. We had a lot of fun trying the deck and trying Jekk. You will see probably in the games that I'm gonna play with the deck in a moment after the deck tech. Jekk provided some really brutal swings on the board, and if the opponent doesn't have removal, he completely dominates the board. 6 power quick draw is impossible to stop without removal, so that's something to keep in mind. He actually can be really strong in the right situations and provides some nice proactive top end for a deck like this, and works quite well in the strategy, and the strategy kind of like plays out fairly well in the way that I intended it to and hoped it would. Okay, so last we have to cover the power base. We have 32 power in total with 4 Seek power. That is an important number. Like, if it would be possible, I could see myself considering 31, but the problem is then you're just undercutting the influence requirements and sigil requirements and stuff so much that the deck will just operate much worse. So I'd rather have a more conservative amount of power to make to better meet my influence criteria. So yeah, we have 8 sigils plus 4 seek, that gives us 12 sigils. That makes it so that usually 90% of the time, at least by turn 3, our seeds are undepleted, and a reasonable percentage for turn 1 and 2, and on turn 1 we often don't even need to, so we can play our seed depleted if we don't have a sigil. That's not a big deal. We are pretty heavy on banners. We have 10 banners, simply because the deck has quite a bunch of units and wants to curve out, so it's important to have enough power that we can play undepleted to curve out, and banners are usually the best power to top deck when you need a power in a deck that has sufficient units. So since top decking a seed with no power in hand is always super frustrating and really hurtful for a deck like that, which is why there's only 8 seeds, 3 Chaos seeds, 1 Seed of Vengeance, and 4 Seed of Glory to meet the requirements for Champion of Glory, which is why there's all the Rakano duels and almost all of the Stonescar duels to fit Champion of Chaos, basically. Yeah, and as we can see, the influence of the deck is 6, 10, 13, 21. 6, 10, 17, 21 fire, 10, 16, 20, 21 justice, which makes sense since the deck is especially heavy Rakano, basically, counting Champion of Chaos of more of a shadow splash. And for shadow we still get 6, 8, 11, 15, 16 shadow. So that still is enough to have, according to the math, to have like one shadow by turn 2 90% of the time, and even like high 80% by turn 1, even though that is not quite true since a lot of our shadow is depleted, so we are not very likely to sabotage turn 1, but that's something that you don't really need or want too much anyway, so that's not a big deal. So we basically have the like minimum shadow to have 90% chance of having a shadow for our Argenport Instigator on 2, and a reasonable amount to incidentally eventually get to Champion of Chaos, especially with like late Seek powers, just getting shadow for champion because we already have our other requirements. And with the 21 Justice and Fire, we are a bit short on the optimal requirements for 90% turn 3 double Justice, but we still have true drops that we can play alternatively, spells that we can use on turn 3, and Champion of Chaos that we can actually easier play on turn 3 than these two. So it seems fine to have less than 90% on those because we have alternatives on 3. And all the other requirements are basically met pretty well. Like we have proper requirements for Obliterate. Champion of Glory is a bit wonky, but then again I cross-checked with like the regular Rakano requirements, and we actually have like the same amount of Justice and Fire as a 2-color Rakano aggro deck has. Like Rakano usually has 8 Fire Sigils, 4 Seals and 8 Duels, which makes for 20 Fire. We have 21, so we have one more even than Rakano aggro. Then Rakano has the same amount for Justice, 20. We have 21, so we also have one more there. And they also have Enforcers, so our Champion of Glory and our double Justice 3-drops are almost more consistent than in Rakano aggro, which is was kind of surprising to me actually. And the main thing basically with this power base is that it can be a bit stumbly. Like the deck sometimes has these slow power deployment draws with a lot of banners early, having to delay our 2-drop till turn 3 and stuff like that, but that's just the cost of getting so much power. And it was surprisingly low impact in the games that we played. Like there were plenty of games where we went like depleted power into 2-drop and still won, simply because of how powerful the cards in the deck are and just like overwhelming the opponent with power, which is kind of the idea here. So that was pretty nice to see. So yeah, give the deck a try. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Getting to play with Jekk for once in a reasonable deck is pretty fun in my opinion. It's a pretty cool card, feels really nice, feels really brutal for the opponent. Lots of fun there. So yeah, stay tuned for 2-3 game videos after this one as usual. Thanks for watching, see you in a moment with the first half of the games.